I never thought my life would become the kind of story people read online and assume has to be fake. For most of my marriage, I would have described my husband as a good man, not perfect, not home enough, but good. Mark and I met when we were 19. We got married young, had our daughter Sophie a few years later, then our son Daniel. We built a life just outside Manchester. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. The strange part of our marriage was always his work. About 14 years ago, Mark helped launch a logistics company that rapidly expanded across the country. Most of its major contracts were in the south of England, so he spent most of his time down there. At first, it was supposed to be temporary. Then it became 6 months. Then a year. Then somehow more than a decade had passed. He would come home every other weekend, sometimes less if business was bad. Whenever I asked how much longer it would be like this, he always gave the same answer. Just until things settled down. They never settled down. But life has a way of turning unusual circumstances into normal ones. The kids adapted. I adapted. Eventually, it simply became our life. Then everything changed in the space of a single phone call. At 1:47 a.m. my phone rang. The police told me there had been a serious collision on the M4 near Reading. Mark was alive. Barely, multiple fractures, internal injuries, head trauma. I woke the children, threw bags into the car, and drove south in complete silence. The entire journey felt unreal. When we arrived at the hospital, Mark was unconscious in intensive care. Machines breathed alongside him. Doctors warned us recovery would be slow. For 4 days, we lived in waiting rooms and hospital cafeterias. Then a nurse approached me. "There is a teenage boy asking for your husband." I assumed she meant a nephew or perhaps a family friend. Then she added, "He says he's Mr. Hargreaves' son." I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was impossible. Mark and I had been together for over 20 years. We had 2 children. What she was describing belonged in a television drama, not my life. The nurse led me to a small relative's room. Inside stood a thin boy wearing an oversized gray hoodie. 14, maybe 15. Nervous. Terrified, actually. When he saw me, he stood up immediately. "My name's Lewis," he said. I remember every word that followed. "I think Mark Hargreaves is my dad." At first, I thought there had to be some mistake. Then Lewis produced a photograph. It showed Mark, younger but unquestionably Mark, with a woman I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped. Lewis explained that his mother had died 6 months ago after a long battle with cancer, and he's now living with his aunt. Before she died, she left him a box. Inside were photographs, letters, and a name, Mark Hargreaves. According to her, she had met Mark in Reading during the early years of his company's southern expansion. They had a relationship. Then she became pregnant. Lewis had spent 14 years believing his father either didn't know about him or didn't want him. After his mother's death, he finally decided to find out which one it was. The next 2 days were some of the longest of my life. Lewis remained near the hospital, not demanding anything, not making accusations, just waiting. When Mark finally regained consciousness and became lucid enough to hold a proper conversation, I told him, "There is a boy here called Lewis." He nodded weakly. I continued, "He says you're his son." The moment I said those words, everything changed. Mark looked away, immediately, not confusion, recognition. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he quietly said, "What was his mother's name?" And that was all I needed to know. Later that night, Mark told me the truth. Years ago, while working in Reading, he had a brief relationship with a woman named Claire. It lasted a few months. Then business pulled him elsewhere. He insisted he never knew she became pregnant. Honestly, I didn't believe him. Not then. How could anyone believe that? A woman doesn't simply disappear with a child for 14 years. Surely she would have contacted him. Surely she would have called, written, sent a letter, something. None of it made sense. The following morning, Mark met Lewis. Neither knew what to say. Eventually, Lewis broke the silence. "I just wanted to know if you knew I existed." Mark's answer came instantly. No, for the first time, I believed he was telling the truth. Not because of what he said, because of how he said it. The look on his face wasn't guilt, it was grief. That should have been the end. It wasn't, because the biggest question remained unanswered. If Mark never knew, why didn't Claire tell him? After Claire's death, Louis' aunt, Claire's sister, started clearing out her place. They found a box deep in the corner of the loft, covered in dust and cobwebs, paperwork. Then we found references to someone called R. Calder. The name appeared repeatedly. Emails, meeting notes, internal records. Never enough information to explain who he was, just enough to suggest he was involved. At first, we assumed he was some sort of consultant. Then we discovered something stranger. Nobody officially employed him. Nobody could explain exactly what he did, yet somehow he appeared whenever problems needed to disappear quietly. Over the next few weeks, Mark dug through old company archives. Former employees remembered Calder. Former contractors remembered him too. Everyone described him similarly. Professional. Calm, always in the background. The kind of man who handled difficult situations before senior management even knew they existed. And then we found the final piece. Not in company records, not in legal files, in an archived voicemail server. One of the company's former IT contractors was helping recover old communications. Most of the files were junk, deleted messages, corrupted backups, nothing important. Then he called. He said there was something we needed to hear. A voicemail, dated 14 years earlier. The caller was Claire. We listened together, me, Mark, Lewis, my children. The room was completely silent. Claire's voice sounded exhausted. Scared, but determined. She said, "Mark, I don't know if this is still your number. I'm pregnant. I need to speak to you directly. Someone from your operations side keeps telling me they'll handle it and that you don't want contact. I don't believe that. Please call me yourself." Then she left her phone number, and the recording ended. Nobody spoke. Mark looked physically sick. Because for the first time, we knew exactly what had happened. Claire had tried. She had told him, repeatedly. The messages simply never reached him. The server logs revealed that her voicemail had been accessed 6 minutes after arriving. Not by Mark. By an external account connected to the same operations group that referenced R. Calder. The same name that appeared throughout the documents. The same man who seemed to insert himself into situations that threatened the stability of the company. Suddenly, everything made sense. Claire believed she was communicating through people connected to Mark. Mark believed there was nothing to communicate. And in between them sat one man who decided the situation was better off buried. Lewis asked to hear the voicemail again, then a third time. Afterward, he sat quietly for several minutes. Finally, he looked at Mark. "So she tried?" Mark nodded, unable to speak. Then Lewis asked a question that hit harder than anything else. "If she tried to tell you and you never got the message, then who was I angry at all these years?" Nobody had an answer, because there wasn't one person responsible. There was a chain of decisions, a system, people deciding what information mattered, what risks needed managing, what complications should disappear, and a little boy ended up paying the price. A few days later, Lewis asked if he could keep the box his mother had left him, the photographs, the letters, the memories. Mark told him they were his, always had been. As Lewis packed everything away, the IT contractor called and said he found something and will email it. Mark opened the attachment that accompanied the email, an old archive log. Most of it was meaningless technical information. Dates, times, account references. Then one line stood out, the voicemail from Claire, time-stamped the day it arrived. Beside it were 2 words, status, resolved. At 11:12 a.m., 6 minutes after she left the message. That was the last thing we ever discovered about Richard Calder. No confession, no arrest, no confrontation. Just proof that 14 years of silence began with one voicemail that reached the wrong person. And a decision someone made in less time than it takes to drink a cup of tea. Lewis wasn't abandoned. His mother didn't stay silent. His father didn't know. The truth had simply been buried. And for 14 years, everyone involved lived with the consequences.